Yeah, so just a bit about me. As I said, I am an HPCSA registered counselor and program coordinator for the Faculty of Applied Psychology at SACAP, coordinating the academic progression and delivery of the postgraduate space, including research and development. Um, and I really have a deep appreciation for the understanding of people, the people we interact with on a day-to-day basis through our relationships, at work, and maybe this is a bit more academic, but through research as well. And each person we come into contact with and come across is deeply unique, and this uniqueness is what drives my curiosity. And knowing that no matter how similar two people might be that in upbringing or various other similarities, both big and small, that these differences come together to coalesce into a person with their own story to share. And I think through what we look at today, you'll see a lot of that coming through. And without any further ado, with the introductions complete, I think we can head straight into the content for today. So, understanding human behavior. Before we get deep into the context and, the theory and everything behind it, I want you to sort of take a moment to think about yourself, okay? And the thoughts, the behaviors, your emotions, everything that is part of you on a day-to-day basis, okay? And think about how complex and how many factors are at play there, okay? And think about every complex system that goes on within you. Now consider that that goes on in every single person that you interact with, that you see, that you have, a brief interaction with. Yeah. Each person is complex, nuanced, and highly context specific when it comes to our behavior and how we navigate the world. And through our webinar today, we'll be taking a brief glimpse into that understanding. And granted, we'll only be scratching the very surface of it. So I implore you, as we go through this, to also challenge yourself. Take the lessons you learn and carry it forward, apply it to yourself. And where you see a gap, where you want to know more, follow that curiosity and allow yourself to grow and learn in that space. Okay. So when it comes to understanding our behavior, how we act, how we think as humans, I think the one analogy that can often come up is thinking of your brain as a computer. Yeah. And I think with the advent of AI, being in many of our spaces, I think that analogy can come into a lot of our thought processes and how we sort of think of ourselves as well. But it's important, and something I want you to keep at the forefront while we go through the content today is that humans are not robots and our brains are not computers. Yeah. You give a computer input, it gives you the exact same output every time. Yeah. As humans, that doesn't happen. We are far more complex. There's far more to us. Okay. So throughout this, don't see your brain as just a simple computer, and we'll get into that more. On a day-to-day basis, we experience a vast array of different stimuli. Okay. This affects our choices, our actions, and how we behave, both in short and the long term. And as we get into it, you'll see how these all play together. So let's move on to the next point. And through understanding these various aspects, we're going to look at it through the lens of what's on the screen now, these three focus areas. Okay. And to keep in mind that these are not the only factors that influence our behavior. Yeah, there are a variety of different ones. There's far more theories, but we're going to use these three as a brief insight to it. So that being motivation, emotion and cognition, and social. So our social interactions. So let's jump into motivation. Yeah. So we're going to start with what is called BAS and BIS, or the Behavioral Activation System and the Behavioral Inhibition System. So BAS, this explains that when we experience something that's pleasurable, or the expectation that we are going to experience something that is pleasurable, stimulus that is pleasurable, okay, we're activated to move towards this thing. Okay, so we're motivated to take action, behavior, some form of movement that is going to increase the likelihood that we experience that pleasurable stimuli. Okay. So think about something that you find pleasurable in life, something that feels good. Okay. And think about the actions you may take in order to ensure that you receive that, or to ensure that you experience that sort of interaction. Whereas the behavioral inhibition system, okay, is pretty much the exact opposite. And it's us wanting to avoid negatively associated stimuli, okay, or the expectation thereof. This could be the fear of experiencing discomfort or the discomfort itself, okay, and moves us in a way that we want to avoid being in those spaces or to reduce that negative stimulus. Yeah. So looking at BAS, or the behavioral activation system, this could be something as simple as going to a social event, okay, being around friends. Yeah, we take the necessary, or we take behaviors that are necessary or that we believe are necessary to make that more likely. Okay, we interact with our friends more, we make plans, we um, speak to them more often because we want to increase the likelihood of a pleasurable stimulus of being with our friends. Whereas the inhibition system might be, let's say, I think a lot of people don't like the dentist, but you may need to go to the dentist. And, at that point you go, oh, I really don't want to be there. That's uncomfortable. I don't like needles. I don't want to be in that space. So we may delay it. We may put it off for a month. We may put it off for a week. Or we might, behave in such a way that reduces the likelihood of us being in that space. Okay. So let's move on with these in mind and look at how they interact with each other. So with BAS and BIS, avoidance and approach, okay, we are faced with certain conflicts on a day-to-day. Okay. When we are faced with a stimulus or the expectation thereof again, we are motivated to act in a manner that actions us towards that outcome, yeah, that avoids anything that's non-pleasurable, so what we don't want, or seeks out ones that are pleasurable. And with this, we are faced with three sort of challenges or conflicts. And this is avoidance approach, avoidance, and approach. Yeah. So avoidance approach is, and I think we can sometimes go more towards the approach here, is when we're faced with two options. So option one is something that is pleasurable, and option two is something that is not pleasurable. It's discomforting. It's something we don't want to um, experience. And in that space, we may feel it's easier to approach that which is pleasurable. Yeah. Then we have avoidance. And here we're faced with two bad options. Yeah. Or two negatively feeling options. And this can feel really challenging at times because, okay, which of the two that I don't want to experience am I going to have to choose? Think of this again. I'll use the dentist analogy here. Let's say you have toothache, but you also really don't want to be um, at the dentist. Okay. So it's two things that you want to avoid, but you have to take an option um, at the end of the day. And then approach. Here we're faced with two options and both are pleasurable. Okay. And this could be something like, again, let's say your friend is having their birthday party and it's something you really want to attend. It's a really close friend. You love being in their presence. It's a pleasurable experience to be with them. But on that exact same day and time, you and your partner have, planned a picnic, and it's something you've been planning for days and days, weeks and weeks, days and days, months, whatever it may be, and something you've also really been anticipating and looking forward to. Okay, your behavior in any of these conflicts, okay, is going to take you either in the direction of avoiding something negative, approaching something positive, depending on what that stimulus is. And when you really are aware of these things, I think it can be quite interesting to see yourself on a daily basis of, okay, am I avoiding? Am I approaching? What is my conflict here? And what is the decision that I'm going to make with my behavior in this space and context? And as we go forward, you'll see that this isn't just an isolated thing that we experience. It's influenced by a vast array of different factors. So let's jump into that a little bit more. So our emotions and emotional responses are deeply linked to our motivation as well. Okay. Consider that on any given day, you're feeling bored. When you experience this emotion, you may be more inclined to seek out something that is a pleasurable experience, i.e., to stop the boredom. Or if you're feeling sad, you may avoid certain interactions, certain spaces, or anything that you may normally do. And from an outside perspective, this can seem strange or, a bit illogical, if you can put it like that, to say, okay, but, this person usually does these things. Why are we not doing it anymore? And this is why I say we're not computers, because a computer would simply just move along, do the same things it always does. But our emotions are deeply linked to us and who we are, and we are human beings at the end of the day. And it's important to recognize that, our emotions influence our actions in this space. Thinking back to, the example of avoidance approach, avoidance, avoidance, and approach. Okay. Think of a space where you've had to face either one of those. Okay. Let's say it is the avoidance. And on that particular day, or avoidance approach rather, and on that particular day, you received news in the morning that just annoyed you. Yeah. And you've been feeling annoyed since, and while, the less appealing or the less pleasurable option might be the option that you need to take or that might be best for you, having that emotion is now also influencing it to say, okay, well, what is my behavior actually taking me towards? And how is it being influenced by this emotion, by this, want to not be in an unpleasurable space or a discomforting space? And how is my behavior sort of carrying me towards that? And as we go through this, I want you to keep in mind that being self-aware of these things is often the first step and a really powerful step to understanding your emotion and your behavior, your motivation, and where that all comes in. Because we cannot control the emotions we have, how we feel about things in many cases. However, we can control how we react to these things. Okay. So let's take a deeper look into this. So I want you to sort of understand your emotions through these two scales. So valence and arousal. Valence is how good or how bad we feel about something. Okay. This is a sliding scale with two polar ends going from feelings that are completely unpleasant. We want to avoid them. We don't want to be there. To others that are pleasant, that are pleasurable, that we want to experience, that we, you know, want to be around and have, as much of as possible. Yeah. Whereas arousal is how activated or deactivated slash relaxed we feel. Yeah. And how much energy we are putting in or giving to that emotion. So it's the degree to which we take action and are activated. And this is also on a sliding scale from, again, deactivated, so low energy, not much action, to activated, being high energy, action into the space, things like that. So, an example, we can take high valence and high arousal being feelings such as happiness. Okay. High valence, it's something we like, it is pleasurable, we want to experience happiness. And high arousal, happiness. We are taking action, we are energized, we want to, take that feeling forward in our motivation. Whereas low valence and low arousal can be experienced as, in the previous example, as boredom. Yeah. Something we don't really want to feel, that we don't really want to experience. And there's not much energy in that space either. Okay. And I am going to ask you all, if you can, and if you are comfortable to do so, to please take a moment to open the chat. Okay. And consider your emotions and maybe pop in an example of what for you is high valence and low arousal, and then high arousal and low valence. And I'll also give a few examples of these from my side as well. But just take a second to think of emotions that feel good, yeah, and that you want to be experiencing, but maybe aren't, super high energy. And on the other side, maybe, what are those emotions that don't feel good, that you want to avoid, that you don't want there, you don't want to experience all the time. Yeah. And but it's also high energy or highly um activating for you. Yeah. So take a moment if you can to pop something in the chat and we'll just have a look there as well. Let's see. High valence, low arousal being relaxation. Interesting. Yeah. Low valence and high arousal being rage. Yes, definitely. Yeah. So thank you everyone for putting into the chat, and I'm going to encourage you to continue doing so. But consider when you're feeling an emotion, take a second to go, okay, where does this sit on the two scales? Okay. Is it um, is it feeling good? Is it feeling bad? Just remember there's no good and there's no bad emotions, but there are good feeling and bad feeling emotions. And then how activated or deactivated and relaxed are we on this emotion? It's really useful to be able to put the emotion into the scale, uh, to sort of begin that self-awareness and understand where we are. So, if we're thinking about something that is high in activation and maybe low in valence, so something we don't want to experience, but is very high in that activation. As it's actually just been put into the chat, is sort of stress and anxiety. Yeah, we don't want to feel it, but there's a lot of energy behind it. Yeah. Whereas having low arousal, being quite relaxed, but it's also a good emotion, okay, is that feeling of serenity or just being calm in a space. Okay. So take a moment to use these when you're trying to also uh, think about your emotion and be self-aware of that. But let's take this forward as well and see how it sort of ties in. So we have an understanding of our emotions. We, know where the valence is, how activated we are. Um, but when we experience a form of stimulus, okay, that's what triggers the emotion. Okay. Or even before that stimulus comes in, we might have that emotion. Okay. And it's important to know that a stimulus that triggers the emotion, okay, can be physiological, psychological, or from social interaction. Yeah. Think if, I know, again, I'm going to use that example. There's a fear of needles, okay? And that could be a stimulus that we want to avoid. We don't want it, not happy for us. We might receive bad news. We might receive good news. And these different stimuli all affect us as humans on a day-to-day basis, and we form emotions related to these stimuli. Okay, so from this, we receive the stimuli, comes to us in one way or another, be that physical or physiological, psychological, someone tells us something. And then based on that, we go through something called appraisal, okay, where we judge immediately what is the stimulus to me? Okay. Is this good? Is it bad? Is this something I need to act upon? What is that? Um, what is the stimulus telling me and how am I interpreting it? Okay. And I think to really understand this, I want you guys to take a moment and put yourself into this context. Okay. You are at a very busy social event. Okay. And another attendee at this event bumps into you, causing you to lose your balance. Perhaps you fall over, um, you spill your food. Let's say it's a really fancy event and you dirty your dress or your suit or whatever it may be that you're wearing. Okay. Um, if we're going off appraisal, that immediate stimuli is physiological, it's physical, somebody is bumping into us, okay? We immediately appraise that to go, okay, what does this mean for me? Okay. If we appraise it as, okay, this was a genuine mistake, this is not threatening, we may react, with forgiveness and say, oh no, it was just a mistake. that's, all it was. Or if, we experience this as like a threat, somebody has like, intended to harm us or bump into us intentionally, um, as an act of aggression, we may react with anger and our behavior would be shaped as such. Okay. So, and this is in all contexts when we receive a stimuli, we appraise to go, okay, how are we experiencing this? And we often interpret stimuli as either good, bad, or threatening, and we act accordingly. And the important thing to remember here is that at the end of the day, we are all human. Emotion is a normal part of this whole stimulus involved process. And we can't necessarily control that emotion. Okay. We can't immediately change our emotion from happy to sad, from sad to angry, from angry to calm. We don't have a direct control over that all the time. But what we can do, and as I mentioned earlier, is make conscious decisions on how we react. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, if you've identified that emotion, go, okay, this is where it is, this is where I am. How am I going to react? Okay. What is necessary for me to, take the next step with my behavior in this scenario? And the example here is a very short-term example. So it's, one stimuli, one action, one behavior. Okay. But it can also be a long-term thing of how are we interpreting multiple stimuli? How are we react? How are we reacting over time? Um, and the more aware we are of this, the more likely it is that we can make a conscious effort to decide how we are going to react and how we are going to use that stimulus. Okay. So receiving stimulus is not inherently bad, inherently good, but it's something that we can take, okay, be aware of, and then decide, okay, given all the information I have, how am I going to react to this? Okay. And I think it is very easy to do this appraisal very quickly and automatically, because most of the time that's what we do. Okay. We receive a stimulus, we receive the emotion, we appraise it, and then react immediately. Whereas if we can slow that down a bit to say, okay, this was the stimulus, I've got the emotion, I can identify the emotion, this is how I'm interpreting it, and this is how I'm going to react accordingly or behave accordingly. Okay, so let's jump in a bit further to our next point, yeah, which ties very closely in, and you'll see how it sort of connects to um, how we behave and how we react based on our emotion as well. But that's our cognition and our reasoning. Yeah. And the things I want to focus on in this section here are schemas, scripts, and models. Yeah. Some of you may have heard of these before, especially if you have, been in any exposed to anywhere in the psychology space. But a schema is a sort of packet of information that we have. Okay. And these packets of information, there's multiple, it's not just one. These packets of information are what we use to navigate the world and make understandings of the information we get. Okay. So we develop schemas as a means to understand our world and guide our thinking. These packets of information guide how we interpret the information from an external influence, stimuli, interaction, anything like that. Okay. Our scripts are a set of information pertaining to how we expect something to play out. Okay, so let's say you're going to the cinema, going to watch a movie. Okay, you would expect, based on your script, that you buy your ticket, you get your popcorn, you go inside and sit down, the lights go off, the trailers start playing, and then the movie starts. Okay, that's a script. We have an understanding of these are the steps, or rather, this is the order of progression that is going to take place. Yeah, and when I say should, okay, so this should happen, then this should happen. It's important to know that that should is based on our script, and that script can be different from person to person. Yeah. Then our models. So these are formed from information on practical steps, okay, or diagnostic processes. For example, one practical step may be baking a cake. Okay. I know that these are the steps I have to follow. I have to put all the dry ingredients together, all the wet ingredients together, and I need to mix it. put it in the tray, they put it in the oven, or I guess the more permanent one now is you can bake in an air fryer, which is wonderful. Um, and then those are the steps that I need to take to achieve the certain outcome. Okay. And that's sort of the reasoning that we use when it comes to our models. Whereas our diagnostic process, okay, might be, okay, I see that there are dark clouds in the sky. It's likely to rain. Okay. I'm making um, I'm ascertaining information that I have and making a judgment from there. Okay. So one thing that's really important to know about script schemas and models is that they are highly contextual and differ between different people. Okay. This can be your social context, your upbringing, and exposure to different types of stimuli or different types of spaces, as well as the information you have, um, your cultural upbringing, your educational upbringing, um, your workspace. These all influence how you understand your schema, scripts, and models, or how you form each of these. So let's continue with cognition and reasoning into our next point. Yeah. And again, there's multiple ways to understand reasoning, but for today, we're going to focus on these two, which is deductive and inductive. In deductive reasoning, we take the general information that we have, apply it to very specific scenarios, problems, or ideas. Okay. So the example there is that, okay, the general information I know is that all mammals have lungs. Okay. This is true. I also know that lizards have lungs. Therefore, lizards are mammals. Okay. And while the conclusion we're drawing isn't necessarily correct, okay, the way we deduce that or way we use deductive reasoning for that is. Okay. And this can work in both ways. We may start with information that is incorrect and take that process forward with deductive reasoning to, reach an outcome, but that outcome might not be wholly correct because of the information we started with, which is why, again, we're not robots. Okay. We all experience information, we get different information, and we reason with it in different ways. Then inductive reasoning, okay, is where we draw conclusions and understandings from our specific and individual occurrences and apply it to the general. Yeah. So this is based on the perceived probability of something. Yeah. And it's not always true. Basically, we're taking experiences that we have and performing our reasoning based on that and going, so one example I can sort of give is, let's say you go to school or university, where you're going to work um, for 3 years, yeah? And in those 3 years, each day you drive to and from, or you take public transport to and from, yeah? But on one day, okay, out of those, well, 365 days in a year, so about 1,000 days, one of those days, okay, you experience a traumatic event, okay? Let's say a witness to a hijacking, or you hijacked yourself, okay? Or you're at home and think about how long maybe you've lived in that house, and the one night your house is broken into, okay? After that event, okay, even though the probability is like 1 in 1,000, if we just look at the dates, for example, okay, immediately after that, we go, this is likely to happen again. Yeah. So we would then take steps, and now we're going back to sort of the motivation there. We then take the steps to go, okay, wait, we need to do things to decrease the probability or the likelihood of this ever happening again. So be that increased security, different routes, even though the actual probability of it happening again is very low, because it's happened to us, it's perceived as much higher. Yeah. And I do want to be very clear. The example is no way to diminish any experience similar to that. I think it is a challenging experience and a difficult one to go through. But I think that example really does help understand inductive reasoning in a very grounded and um, a very grounded example. Yeah. But let's move forward from reasoning, from deductive and inductive reasoning, okay, into our social influence. And I want you guys to take a moment throughout this, okay, and think about yourself in social contexts. How do you behave? How do you react? How do you think? Yeah. How does your emotions come into play? How does your motivation come into play? Okay, as you think about these. So let's say you're in an unfamiliar social context. Okay. Often you can have thoughts of how should I act? What do I say? Where should I be? Who should I be talking to? And these are all very common thoughts that come up. Okay. And part of being human is that we are social and we want to fit in. We want community. We want to have people that we relate to. Okay. And if you are comfortable doing so, if you can just put maybe a yes or a no, have you experienced, thinking about yourself in an unfamiliar social context? Have you experienced any of these thoughts where you may be thinking, gosh, how am I supposed to act? Where must I be? Um, what do I say in this context? Who am I supposed to be talking to? I'm also seeing thumbs up, and I see the chat is yes, yes. Yeah, and I think it's also important to know that almost all of us will experience this at some point in time. And in that, you're also going to notice that maybe you're acting very out of character. Yeah. But also thinking now about, let's go back to the motivation. Okay, we're feeling this discomfort, where we don't know how to act, we don't know how to behave. Okay, how are we going to take actions to avoid this discomfort or reduce it or move to a more pleasurable space? So that might be, okay, I'm going to go stand outside, okay, where there's less of a crowd. I might feel more comfortable there, less uncomfortable. Or I might go, I know one of my close friends are here, so let me go find them. Okay, that's going to be more pleasurable for me. Okay, so even though in a social context, we might think, okay, our script, okay, is to be, okay, this is a social context. In a social context, we interact with different people. We need to introduce ourselves. So let me go introduce myself to random people. Okay, much easier said than done. So then our motivation comes in to say, okay, wait, let's maybe go do something that's not as distressing or uncomfortable. Yeah. Just being conscious of time. Also looking at the other examples here. So how about speaking up against the opinion of a crowd? Okay. Or how might you behave if you find somebody attractive? Yeah. Is your behavior, you maybe change it? Is it different to how you might usually behave? Um, and this can be something really small or something, quite drastic where it's out of character. But I think we also find, we may talk differently. We may speak in a different tone. We may present ourselves differently in these spaces. And I think it's, first of all, it's a human thing to do these, but also being aware that and coming back to that self-awareness in that space. Um, then with speaking up against a crowd, just think of yourself in the when you're in not even I'm not talking about a massive crowd here, but even in the workplace or in a classroom, um, even at the dinner table, say there's a common opinion that everyone is sort of like, yeah, I think I agree with this, I agree with this, and that's sort of the following sentiment. But how does it feel to speak up against that? Okay. And for some people, that might be easy, that might be difficult. Yeah. Perhaps it's pleasurable and exciting and think about the valence as well to be in a conversation where you can debate that. Whereas for other of us, we may say, okay, actually, we don't really want to speak up about that. We don't really want to do that because that's a negative emotion and that's going to affect how we behave and what we say. Um, so bringing a social influence into the context of how we think, behave, use our emotion, follow our motivation, as you can see, it all really does tie in together and can be quite intricate and complicated at times. But the first step really is to be self-aware and developing that self-awareness to go, okay, this is sort of where I am. This is what I'm feeling. This is where my thinking is. Okay. And this is how I think I'm going to react. Yeah. And we're all going to follow that process in a very different way. We're all going to behave in a very different way. We're all going to interpret different stimuli in a different way. I might interpret something as threatening, whereas you may interpret it as something that's bad. Okay. You may behave or react to that stimuli in a way that is completely different from me, even if I was in the exact same scenario. Okay. So thinking back to schemas, scripts, and models as well, if I've grown up, okay, I've gone through um, high school, I'm working and I'm in a position where I've developed a very um, particular, schema of understanding the world, my packets of information, whereas you might, have information could be very different to mine, okay? And it can be due to a small change, be it the social, rather the cultural upbringing you had. Okay. And based on that, we react and behave in very different ways, which from an outside perspective, you may go, that doesn't make sense. Why are you reacting that way? Why are you behaving this way? But also important to know that somebody might be thinking that about you as well. So being open and willing to understand yourself and others in that way is incredibly important. But what I will say is even understanding yourself and being fully self-aware is, incredibly difficult. Um, it's even harder to, try and understand somebody else's behaviors, actions, and thoughts. So be open-minded. Don't, if I can say, uh, predict or mind read, what somebody else might be thinking or feeling. But also being open to understanding other people is incredibly important. And I think with the context that we've kind of touched on today, again, only scratching the surface, I think we can sort of see that we all have, again, varying different amounts of systems at play when it comes to how we behave. Um, and introspection on that can be incredibly useful to go, okay, how am I going to react to this emotion, even though, yeah, I can't control that emotion? And when you see somebody else behaving in another way, not to say I know how they're feeling, I know how they're thinking, but to say, okay, that person is behaving in a way due to these different contexts, due to um, the motivational factors, due to their emotions. Yeah. But before I veer any further, just to say that we act to enhance our social interactions and avoid negative experiences and increase the positive ones. So very similar to that motivation point as well. That when we're in these social interactions, we take our behavior and put it in such a way that enhances those positive ones, decreases those negative ones. And we can also see that in others from time to time. But again, being fully self-aware that we can't 100% know what another person is thinking, feeling, or how they're feeling that at any stage. Yeah. Um, and that does bring us to the end of our content. Please do follow us on our various social media channels to stay up to date on any further upcoming events, program launches, updates, and to see the recording of this webinar as well. Yeah. Once again, I want to thank everyone, all our attendees for being here and joining in this afternoon. I hope you have gained something from this. I hope you take a moment to introspect, reflect a little bit where you can and where you're able to and where you're willing to. And I hope you have a wonderful day further.